According to most scholars, the Tuesday of Holy Week, or Holy Tuesday, is when Jesus was challenged by leaders of a couple of the religious groups of his day, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they challenged him over subjects such as marriage in heaven, paying taxes to Caesar, and the source of his authority. You can read those in Matthew 21, Mark 11, or Luke 20. Perhaps a brief explanation of these two groups will help. The Sadducees were generally the more wealthy group. They were politically minded and often compromised with secular leaders. The Sadducees welcomed the Roman rule. The Sadducees viewed only the Torah, or the first 5 books of our Bible, as scripture and didn't take the oral law or tradition as authoritative or binding. They did not believe in a resurrection or an afterlife of any sort. They didn't believe in much of the spiritual realm, such as angels or demons. And they didn't like Jesus because they were afraid that Rome would see him as a king greater than Caesar, and they would lose their power. The other major group was called the Pharisees. This group resisted secular influence such as Roman rule. They were separatists praying for Israel's independence. They believed oral law and tradition held as much authority as the written scripture. Unlike the Sadducees, though, they believed in a hierarchy of angels and demons in the spiritual realm. And the Pharisees were very, very strict, usually teachers in the synagogue throughout Israel. They didn't like Jesus much either, and they often fought with him because of his teachings were a little bit different than theirs. For example, what a person could do or could not do on the Sabbath. Understand there's much more to these groups, and there were other religious groups at the time as well. But the Pharisees and the Sadducees disagreed. But on this Holy Tuesday, and as it got closer to the times and when Jesus would die, these groups tried to trap him. For example, in Matthew 22, we read these verses. Then the Pharisees met together to plot how to trap Jesus into saying something for which he could be arrested. And then, a few verses later, that same day, Jesus was approached by some Sadducees, religious leaders who say there is no resurrection from the dead. And they posed this question. You're going to have to read Matthew 22 to find out what that question is. But each time the religious leaders tried to get Jesus to say something wrong, he came up with the perfect answer. He had so much wisdom, and they couldn't trap him. He could not say anything wrong. The crowds understood this, and we read, when the crowds heard him, they were astounded at his teaching. Eventually, the Sadducees would give up, but the Pharisees kind of kept on trying, and we read this challenge. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees with his reply, they met together to question him again. Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses? Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these 2 commandments. On Tuesday of Holy Week, Jesus gives the great commandment. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And that sums it up pretty nicely. In today's world, there are many different religious groups. There are different Christian denominations and groups, sometimes united by their denomination, but also by their understanding of Scripture or politics. The different groups often fight with each other, and in so doing, turn a lot of people from the faith. But into that comes the wisdom of Jesus. Love God, love neighbor. Of course, we sometimes struggle with what that means, but in the end, in the midst of the battles, we must seek to love God with our whole being and love our neighbor as we would expect to be loved. There's lots more that happened on Holy Tuesday. But maybe, like life itself, it comes down to these. Love God, love neighbor.